enabling research-ready institutions. My vision in this topic is a little bit biased. I am from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. I concentrate much more as a part of the institute in science, especially physics, chemistry, biology, computer science, and maths. So my slides or my talk or my exposition will be related to that. So I will try and explain and understand and convey to you what it means to build a research-ready institution, institution where basic research with applied possibilities or an intermixture of basic and applied research can go on. What will be required to be successful in this? What are the challenges? What are the weaknesses? And what are the opportunities that we have? As it says, what this needs is a vision, a policy, and pathway. And so vision and policy. Now, first, what is really, really important is vision, but I'll come to you in a little bit about the vision a little later, especially when I talk about the case study of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. So first thing, of course, is to have the vision. And one can set a vision primarily for what the institution is supposed to be. And when I say institution vision, one has to keep in mind. So somewhere I was listening to one of the TED Talks. What is the difference between an Apple company which makes mobile phones compared to many other companies which make mobile phones? Apple makes the phones to be at the top edge of what they do. A lot more companies make mobile phones because they want to sell and make money. Understand the difference between the aspects and the core of it. When your vision or your idea is to make the best, and that is the core theme, then sometimes it's possible that the rest follows automatically. I'm not saying all the time, because success requires a lot more ingredients than just the vision and the ability to pursue the vision. But more often than not, if you stick to your vision and face the challenges and overcome the difficulties, there is a very likely chance that one can succeed. And the vision also requires a policy. So I just listed some of the policies I think are required for a successful research institution. The first thing is a flat hierarchy. Okay, what do I mean? Research is not something that is stationary. It is extremely fast-pacing, moving, changing. Now, just imagine I read physics 25 years ago, and if I don't really keep myself updated with the latest of what is happening, it's very, very difficult for me to connect to what is happening today. And to create a policy for what I don't know, it becomes extremely challenging. So let me take, for example, even if I had to annoy some people, let's talk about quantum computing. So today, quantum computing is a mission, it's a desire, it's the aspect that we all want to jump in. But quantum computing is not the same as classical computing. It's not the same as what people might have studied or pursued their research in their careers, even at a very, very successful end, unless they are practitioners of this. The whole subject got changed quite dramatically in the last few years. And it's only the researchers who are young, who have dabbled with this, who have played with this, who have spent hours in the lab, can actually understand what it means to build a quantum computer. So if such people are not there as at the main places to talk about how to take this forward, it becomes a lot more difficult. Yes, the most successful people who have done nice, great things in the past do have experience, but that alone does not help Because if you, a quantum computer doesn't look like anything like what we have. And nobody at the moment really seriously knows what all things it is really going to be changed and used in a very, very effective manner. And because of the research being changing very, very fast, you also need to be flexible. Again, let's say I think of a particular policy or particular equipment. It is very likely possible that even before the equipment is funded, equipment is coming into the place, it may already be outdated by the time you really start using it for doing research. So to be able to make the best of the public funding, due course process, due diligence, strict misuse policy, strict transparent policy, sometimes we'll end up giving you something which may not be really the thing that will be really useful. And that can actually change things quite dramatically, because in science is universal. It is not like there is nothing like an Indian science and a African science or a Singapore science. Because the nature does what it does, and all of us are trying to practice, understand, follow the nature, and try and see how you can manipulate the nature for our benefit or our objectives. So what is absolutely necessary is to be flexible, to be frozen, to be hard, to be seriously organized, sometimes is actually detrimental, especially when a fast-paced changing world. I mean, there are instances I know in the institutions where, of course, dates back to the old times, right, where you buy a computer and you didn't know that the computer does not come with a keyboard. I'm talking about days of DEC Alpha. And you cannot plug in any keyboard of those times because you have to buy the keyboard from the same company. It takes 15 lakhs in 1990 to buy this DEC Alpha. It takes about 2 years, but the keyboard was forgotten. And when it came to installation, keyboard had to be ordered again. And it takes about 1.5 years to get the keyboard to arrive. And no flexibility to be able to change the things in any which way. So by the time the keyboard came and the computer got installed, the computer was not at all worth it. The same computation could be done on a 1 lakh computer. So research, and this is a thing of the past, and it will be thing of the future, especially as we go forward, because every country is now building knowledge society. They're building people who can change and turn over things at a much faster rate. So we have to be flexible. The third thing is the ease of doing science. And I'm sure most of you will agree. If I have to wait 1 year to get something, and my counterpart in the Western world or in the better part of the Eastern world gets it in 1/10 of the time, and he can execute the ideas faster than me, I may be following the complete due diligence, but by the time the real purpose of the objective of doing that may become irrelevant. So we would have ticked all the boxes as for the book very, very correctly, but we would have missed the real bus. And the other important thing is the head hunting for the right talent. The science is done by people. The most important things are ideas. Most important ingredient to the whole thing is the creative ability to think of something, to have the sharpness of an eye to see something that has been missed by sometimes 10 years or sometimes even longer than that. So how do we go for headhunting when we are muddled ourselves with currencies or of academic nature of this tick box and that tick box and that number and this number? Because I don't think creativity can actually be put in any of these tick boxes, whether you say H index or any other index you can think of. Because there is no guarantee that because you have succeeded in the past, you will succeed in the next, or just because you have failed so far, that you cannot succeed in the next. What is important is the idea. What is the important is to be able to see whether you can come up with this way of solution. I'll just give you one simple example. In TFR, we have a PhD student interviews. There is a very large fraction of time, maybe about 10-15% of the time, where we have a student coming in front of us and taking a 1-hour interview, and all the committee members are saying, okay, this guy is excellent, let's give him the research position. And then we come to know that that guy has not cleared their regular master's course with pass. He has some things to fill up. And on the other hand, and we say, okay, we have no problem, finish your courses and come back. As far as we are concerned, you can start research from tomorrow onwards. That flexibility, that adaptability is necessary. On the other hand, we have people who tick all the fantastic boxes. You know, people from the most endowed institutions ticking the entrance exams very well. But when you come and ask them the basic questions, sometimes things are not what they seem to be. It has to be left to the researcher to be able to do this. It cannot be constrained in the boxes. And of course, there is a danger, or there is a fear of misuse. There is a fear of biases. There is a fear of policies which look very wonky. But I think in research that perhaps is necessary, and you have to have a framework which can handle this. And the way, at least in Tata Institute, what we do is, we have, even for a research scholar who comes and sometimes even spends a 6 months project, we'll have 4 or 5 people looking at him, talking to him, and interviewing with him for maybe half a day. If there is a faculty member that is coming, we interact with him for 2 full days. Each faculty member sits and talks to him over an hour or more, trying to understand what his research is, how he's able to convey his research, and so on and so forth. So this collective mechanism is probably cannot go that wrong, because it's not easy, as somebody was just saying, if you have a 500 H-index, you have to have 500 papers, and to be able to tell 500 of your friends to go and refer to this paper. It's practically not possible. And even if somebody actually tries to do that, I don't think it is very, very difficult to make out and see what it does. Another thing is, things require a long-standing support. It's not instant 2-minute noodles. The research is a gourmet cooking. It requires certain seriousness, it requires certain ability to do things, and requires long-standing support. I'll probably take some examples following, but like, for example, TFR has set up about almost 15-20 years ago to set up an X-ray satellite to look at X-ray astronomy. And we had to build the detectors from the scratch of one of its kind in the world, which will compete with the best in the world. And with the limited budgets and limited resources we have, it is not an easy challenge. It took a large fraction of faculty members over 10-15 years to develop this. But then at the end of it, when it goes up and it produces the best X-ray astronomy data that anywhere possible in the world, and it's the most competing tool of that science in the world, it is very, very pleasing. There's a chance of failure, and no doubt about it. But if you want to do certain things, it requires that long-standing support. And quantum computing, for example, is one such thing. You cannot get up next day morning and say, I will throw in 5,000 crores, build me 4 quantum computers. You need people who knows what it is to build cryostat technology. You need people who can know how to build vacuum technologies, very, very different and difficult advanced electronics. And you have to have theoretical approaches to it. It requires multidisciplinary approach coming together with core strength in each and every different thing, whether it is material science, whether it is fabrication, whether it is integration. And the last I would say is the risk engagement and risk management. Anything that is challenging is involved with risk. Let me try and give an example of something that has happened in US almost 50, 60 years ago. All of you know, I mean, laser is, this is the green beam that you see is a laser. When the laser was discovered, and the laser was very, very meager power, like the power that we are talking about, the laser that I have in the pointer. One of the theoreticians scaled it up and said, oh, right now the laser is microjoule pulse, but if you can make it into a megajoule pulse, you can create nuclear fusion on a controlled way and have undepletable energy. And the vision, of course, is you can't do it tomorrow. You can't do it in one day. It has taken 50 to 60 years, but the project was started by a young professor from Berkeley when he was at 35. Was it doable at that time? It was actually mission impossible. Nobody in the world knew how to make a megajoule laser out of a microjoule technology. But the country believed, the institutions believed in it. They allowed people to practice this research at not on one place, but several places. And people improved systematically over the last 50 years. About 2 years ago, they have created the nuclear fusion using intense lasers, and they got a break-even of one kind. When I say break-even of one kind, you'll see if you Google it, you'll say you have got break-even. And the break-even means amount of laser energy going in and the amount of neutron energy that you're able to generate is equal. This experiment took about $1.5 billion, about 2 generations and 3 generations of scientists who improved meticulously each and every very small bit. It is still not successful, because you can't set up a power system today. It will take another 50 years. But the moment that was successful, US came up with a second plan of putting about $1.5 billion in a public-private partnership to take this from an experiment to a possible test prototype. The real product may come out much later. So why do we need to do this? There is renewable energy, there is every other progress that is happening. I would say there are 2 main reasons. One, there are scientists who are mad. And frankly, they are mad. If there is a challenge, they would not mind spending 30 years of their life trying to break that challenge. Is it useful? Maybe most of them probably will not be worried whether it is useful or not. If they get an opportunity to do it, they will do it. Right? 90% of what we have been successful today to use it actually have come out of that madness. I mean, whether you call it, talk about GMR, giant magnetoresistance, which came out of the physics labs of how magnetic fields can be toggled. Nobody at that time, no research who are doing that time would have ever thought that, the whole computer industry is going to change because of my innovation. Things happen because once we have the ability to do things, human ingenuity has ways to make use of it. Lasers was a fantastic demonstration of a physics phenomena without finding any applications for almost 15 years. Today, there is nothing that you do in your modern day thing without lasers, whether it is printing, whether it is communication, whether it is poking holes in the nice metal frames that you build for your living room, or whether it is eye surgery, whether it is cardiac surgery, whether it is what have you. There is nothing today that you can't do without lasers, or you can't do without lasers. that requires a certain maturity of following and supporting science. And I mean, we have not been bad at it, but we could be much, much better about it. And the journey of TFR, in my opinion, is actually a very good example of this journey for India. So I'll take some of these with, so let me try and put some of these things in the case study of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. By the way, how many of you know Tata Institute of Fundamental Research? 5%? 10%? Okay. So let me try and tell you what Tata Institute of Fundamental Research about is and why is it relevant to be talked about. If some of you don't know this gentleman, Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, I think it is crucially important for us all to know. He was one of the biggest visionary for modern science in the country. He came in because of some circumstances from England. He came to India and he could not go back because of the war. He took up a job in ISC Bangalore as a professor, and he could have been satisfied with it and done good research that he is always capable of. But he had this vision for the country. And he set up a goal for himself, and the whole vision started with this 12th March 1944 letter to Sir Sorabji in Tata Trust, saying that I want to build a school of advanced, with advanced branches of physics on par with the best in the world. This is his dream, this is his vision. Now, it may be a vision that may have looked extremely crazy at that time if you think of 1945. So, we were the country, we had just about to get our freedom. We were under British rule, exploited left, right, and center. We had some good school of physics and good physicists, no doubt. But to be able to think of an institution that is comparable with the best in the world is not so easy vision. And he was not very old at that time. He was not like the Bhabha that we think of Bhabha at a later stage. There were other bigger stalwarts who were much more successful in physics, but he had this vision. And his vision was to have this place where the main focus will be on excellence. And actually, he did not really care too much about whether it was a pure research or an applied research. In fact, he had integrated both of these into one. But at the same time, he had the vision to separate these two. One was TIFR, where he was the founding director and where he started the whole plan for India. And then he had this, good physics should lead to solutions to the problem of the country. And the nuclear power for India was his vision. Now, again, imagine we are talking about 1945, 1944, where to have the 90% of the kitchens were still being run on wood, not even gas, not even on kerosene. And his vision was, I want to nuclear power India. Very tall task, very difficult task. There's hardly any set of people who can take up such a challenge. That's where he set up a Tata Institute of Fundamental Research to be able to be a cradle for putting people who can think big, dream big, and cultivate a sense of research that can really meet some of the dreams. On the other hand, the requirements for an applied research are very different. The targets are very different. The analysis is very different. The way you evaluate to be able to continue to fund is very different. So in the same town, there was TIFR and there was Bhabha Atomic Research Center. Of course, it became Bhabha Atomic Research Center after he passed away suddenly. But he started the Applied Research Center in the what is now called as Anushakti Nagar, and focused the applied research there. So he visioned that the TFR will be the cradle for new technology, and it will continue to be small, continue to produce and accumulate people who can dream big things for India. And one main outcome of this vision is the Department of Atomic Energy. So he founded the Department of Atomic Energy at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Applied research started in BRC. We had a common graduate school in which the people are trained both and have a choice either to go to a pure research or an applied research to join either BRC program or to a TIFR program. And both of them had different sort of pathways. For example, TFR, after the success of a graduate school program, never gave them job. You know, you're supposed to compete for research and you're asked to find, you may be given a job if you go back, you come back successful. Otherwise, whereas applied research requires completely different mandate. So he created a separate thing where you can finish the training school and you are given a long-term position. So even simple administrative adjustments like this have completely helped in going with this vision. So vision is very, very important. Once you have the core ingredient of the vision, of course, you need to reinvent yourself and look at what your strengths and weaknesses are and do what is relevant for the country at that time. So TFR was a cradle where people came in with different technologies, different methodologies. And some of these institutions that I have listed, whether it is Homeover Science Center or NCBS or ICTS, they're all institutions that are associated with TIFR. They are still run under the aegis of TIFR. There are many institutions that actually became an independent organizations of their own. I don't know how many of you will be aware, the Vikram Sarabhai was a good friend of Baba. And Vikram Sarabhai was brought in to TIFR, had one floor given to him to start the Department of Space, or what is now the roots of the ISRO. So Plasma Research Laboratory was operated in TIFR for some time. And even people like Abdul Kalam were interviewed for their first job in TIFR. So TIFR provided the platform for it to grow on its own and do the fantastic things that it ended up doing. And it's not just one Department of Space. There are many things. I mean, if you talk about National Center for Software Technology, I don't think anybody associates TIFR with computer software. But the first ingredients of what the software science or software growth in India was at the root at TIFR. TIFR had the hardware computing mission in some sense. So the story that we know is that India wanted to buy a supercomputer at some point to be able to do some meteorological science, and because we did not sign certain agreements, we were denied the best of the technology. So TIFR groomed up people together who understand microprocessors and microprocessor technology, and things like ECIL was sort of found its roots there. Things like SAMER, I don't know how much of you know Microwave Engineering Research Institute, which produces the cyclotrons or particle accelerators that are very much needed for medical systems in the country. The first hardware computer, the classical computer, was made in TIFR. It was called TIFRAC, TIFR Advanced Computing System. And people from there shifted out to do bigger things, CDAC, Param, and all those things followed up with that. So TIFR always had this ingredient to bring in people and who can dream differently and then try and pursue this dream. So we are actually a pan-national institute in some sense. Depending on the need, we have gone and set up different organizations, different laboratories at different places, all the way from Ladakh, where we have some astronomical observations, to balloon facility in Hyderabad and Pachmari and things in Bangalore. So these are laboratories that are set up by one of the physicists or a chemist or a biologist who thinks that we need to do something next, something big for the country. And the platform is set through TIFR. For example, let me take the story of radio astronomy. I mean, in the early 60s, of course, this is not something that can immediately catch the imagination of general people. But astronomy is basically looking at stars, and radio astronomy is looking at the radio waves that are generated by the stars. And these are very, very important to know where we are from, how we have come to whereabout we are, what is the celestial dances that are going on. And this is an absolutely beautiful world of a different kind. It requires a lot of madness because you're trying to understand what happened in the first billionth of a second, or how something like a sun can get gobbled up by another big star. How stars can explode, how can whole solar system be reborn or be annihilated in a stroke. So these are scientifically important, and for a human, curiosity, these are very, very crucial. So TFR began radio astronomy, and he brought in one of this young person at that time, in 1963, somebody called Govind Swarup, who was doing a fantastic job of this in the Western world. He brought him a single person to start a group. And today we have a whole new organization with about 40, 50 people working in what we call as National Center for Radio Astronomy. They gone ahead and built really some of the most advanced tools for looking at astrophysical bodies in this spectrum. So now what is at the pinnacle of this activity? We have something called a giant meter wave radio telescope, one of its kind in the world. And people, researchers, astronomers from all over the world come to India, come to this facility to do experiments. The data that is generated by this telescope is shared with a large fraction of the world, and hundreds and hundreds of papers are written in doing this. And the ingenuity was to do it at very, very simple. Govind Swarup had this idea of making a really, really complex machine and break it down to a very, very simple aspect and start this. And I don't want to go into the technical details of this, but the money that is spent, the technology that is spent, that come out of it, are absolutely unique and really at the cutting edge in the world. And if the world wants to take something big, like there is a thing called square kilometer array that the international community is trying to put in together because it can't be sustained by one country anymore. And TFR is one of the main technical organization to take this whole thing forward. I mean, some of you may know things like LabVIEW. And long before LabVIEW was there to talk to the instruments through a computer, our guys in NCRA could make integrated software to be able to control the whole radio astronomy, the telescope sitting anywhere in the world. So this requires multiple things like this. Growth of biology in TFR is another story of that kind. TFR was known for largely physics institute. A lot of people in the faculty and in the decision-making bodies were all physics people. And when Baba used to go for this head-hunting sort of activity, of course, he'll go for a conference, he'll find some young person who is doing fantastically well, and he will invite them to come. And when they come, he will actually make provisions for them to continue their research at the best in the world. So one such person was Ubaid Siddiqui. He came, and the geography was very limited in TFR. There's not too much of space that could be generated to make the biology activity flourish. And one of the other young persons that Ubaid Siddiqui sort of imbibed him into this was another young person at that time called Vijay Raghavan. And all of you, I think, know Vijay Raghavan. He is retired some time back, recent, as the principal scientific advisor to the government of India. So he gave the Professor Vijay Raghavan the room to be able to really envision an activity, and all the support required to make this vision come true was given. And the National Center for Biological Sciences, many of you are probably aware, has been running for the past almost 25, 30 years, expanding into many, many areas of crucial importance to biology, medicine, and so on and so forth. So TFR has this ability to be able to do this, and the game is not over, the game is not ending. We are going to continue to do this, whether it is ecology and evolution, whether it is trying to understand from the molecules all the way to the organismal activity and how the genetics and development can change. And some of this requires a lot of local context, because what happens in the Western world is not necessarily applicable to us, because we have a different genetic makeup, our environment is different, what we eat is different, the way we conduct our holistic activities are very different. So I already mentioned this, I don't think many people will associate TFR with computers, but the first classical computer was made for the country in TIFR. And the first people who became the stalwarts of the software industry, like for example, Tata Consultancy Service, TCS, Professor Kohli, he was the co-founder of and the first CEO of TCS. He was a TFR person to start with. So some of these things, we are not the front players, because we only, as a TFR, when I say we, of course I'm talking about TFR, we are there to make some things happen and let them go and build things, let them go and do things, and garner all the both objectivity and the associated recognitions that come with it. It's not only that we did the first computer and after that we are dead wood. No. The first quantum computer in the country is built in TFR. The only working quantum computer in the country is operated in TFR Mumbai. Of course, we need to scale it up, we need to make it bigger, we need to make it as competent with what happens in Google or MIT. But again, there is a certain culture through which it has to go. If it has to be duplicated, the amount of human resource needed for it, amount of human resource generation needed for it is actually very, very, very different. And of course, we'll hopefully have a full quantum computing system. It will take time, it will take money, it will take efforts to build the whole thing. Right from the beginning, we had a visitor program. I mean, I'm giving you this as example, though I'm trying to put it in the context of TFR. Yeah, 5 minutes. So, science is not done in silos. We need interaction, we need collaboration, we need integrity with the rest of the world of what is happening. We need exchange of ideas, we need exchange of people, we need exchange of information. And, we have been doing this, whether it is Niels Bohr at the time of Baba, or J.D. Watson when Obai Siddiqui brought him, or the latest would be the Nobel laureates or would-be Nobel laureates who would come. I mean, Gerard Mourou was one of the Nobel laureates who received the prize about 5 years ago, but 5 years before that, he was in TFR, and we asked him to do the critical evaluation for some of the laser programs that we are planning to start in Hyderabad. So that peer assessment, peer input is very, very crucially important. And you have to ask the best of the people in the world to be able to do this. And to be able to do this, you need to create this network and a visitor program. In this perspective, we want to take this up even bigger. And we have set up an institution or a center called International Center for Theoretical Sciences. So these people will try and accommodate the best possible. So these are very, very crucially important. And of course, everything that we do, we create what is the statistics required, what is it, the success. And sometimes it's not just one number, it's a peer assessment, like one thing that I don't know many people will understand or how it's done. In TFR, if you want to get a faculty position, when somebody submits their papers, we ask them to give a talks, and I said we have 2 days of interaction. But that alone is not the decision-making thing. We will take this CV to 8 or 10 people in the world. And if the best people are there in the Western world or Eastern world or Germans or South Koreans, it doesn't matter to us. We will take it to the top 10 people in this of that area of research. And we ask one final question. If this person was to come to you, would you give him a job? If a large fraction of the people say yes, then we give him the job. Because individually, people may have perspectives, people may have biases, and you may lose sometimes the perspective. But a peer review is crucially important. So we do that, and not only we do that at every stage. Another thing that I think very, very unique, again, TFR has it's not only to do science, but how do you communicate science? How do people understand science? Now, a lot of it is all written in English. A lot of it is all written, said in sentences that you may not have as good a feel for it. So you need to have an assessment of how the students are perceiving what you're telling. And you need to have, and that itself is actually a research. It's a research in science education. What is cognitive thinking? How do people develop cognitive thinking? How to recognize cognitive thinking? How to, and there may be a guy who is extremely brilliant, but he doesn't know a word of English. He doesn't know a word of Hindi. Such a guy comes, do you superficially look at your ways of life and judge him? No, that's not fair. That's not how it should be done. So how do we recognize this aspect? Can we, so these are the kind of things that we do. And all of you must have heard about Olympiad programs. And India has been extremely successful, having this many medals and this many awards and this many. I'm sure 95% of you won't know that the institution behind this Olympiad training and Olympiad whole program is done by TFR through Homeover Center for Science Education. We conduct programs by which the chosen students who are to be trained to go for Olympiads are taught by the people across the country, the best experts in any given area, whether it is mathematics, whether it is physics, or whether it is chemistry or biology. And this is very, very important. We have started this Vignan Vidushi, encouraging women to take up research in STEM. And all of us know that science education is very, very uneven, whether it comes to gender equality, and we need to change that. So there are many, many things that are happening. I don't need to go more into examples, this thing. I just will probably stop with one. Of course, as I said, we need to have a tradition of excellence that has to be sustained and recognized. And, you can have different measures of success. Here we have put in something that has come in through TIFR, whether it is Padma Awards or whether it is international awards, Bhatnagar Awards, all this. And I think fairly anybody would say we have ticked the boxes reasonably well in these things. So the pathways, reaching out not only to India, but Bharat. I think all of you understand what I mean by reaching out to Bharat rather than only India. Because most of this advanced education or research or reach out we think is only for the metropolis or people who are good at speaking English and presenting themselves differently. But there is a lot of talent at a layer below, and we need to think of ways and mechanisms by which we create opportunities for them. We need to reinvent our institutions because things start fast-pacing and changing. And we need to do continued network, academy, industry, and policy making. My earlier speaker also talked about it. It's a very, very challenging thing. And then add entrepreneurship and finance and economy to it. So far, science has kept itself away from some of these things. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but that's how we were. But I think it's a time to change. A lot of things are already happening and changing is happening. And we need to find a better mechanism to be able to have these two things together. Thank you.